Is anyone coming?
War is when you no longer know where to hide, when home becomes a trap, when you don't know where to run. This is Irpin, west of Kyiv, and the Russians presumably want it because it's part of their stranglehold around the capital.
Дітей 200-х вивозили, мирне населення, маленькі.
No wonder they're all trying to flee. Trying, but not always succeeding. The man you just saw did survive, but a family of 3 was killed by this indiscriminate mortar fire. And then imagine fleeing when your life is packed in a plastic bag. Or when you're carrying your kids because they can't run fast enough. Or you wait for one babushka who can barely walk and another who's forced to run. And all this when there is no let-up in the shooting. And when you have no idea if you can ever return, and to what. When one man's view of historical grievances in Moscow has upended everything that you still took for granted just 11 days ago. Safe for now, on the bus to who knows where. Further south, on the motorway to Kyiv, more evidence of the Russian advance. This was the airfield at Vinnytsia. Yes, Russian troops have got bogged down, but they are still coming. Such is the importance of this target that an exhausted-looking President Zelenskyy took to social media again and accused the West of being complicit for not implementing a no-fly zone.
Ми люди, і це ваш гуманітарний обов'язок захищати нас, захищати людей. І ви це можете. Якщо ви цього не зробите, якщо ви не дасте нам хоча б літаки, щоб ми могли самі себе захистити, то можна зробити тільки один висновок. Ви також хочете, щоб нас дуже повільно убивали.
What NATO lacks in action, Ukrainians make up for in courage. This was the town of Novakakhovka. The Russians occupied it a few days ago. But instead of greeting them with the flowers that Vladimir Putin had hoped for, it is flags and defiance. If he could see these pictures, the Russian president would surely ask himself, how can these people ever be governed by a regime that they now loathe more than they cherish their own lives? Go home, they shout at the Russian troops. The response came in the form of gunfire against civilians. 5 were injured. This is not liberation, it's abomination. But the biggest prize for one side to hold and the other to take is still the capital, Kyiv, where the Ukrainian troops are now preparing for a siege that could last weeks, measured in supplies of Molotov cocktails. It may be a long haul, but war breeds the impatience of carpe diem. Including for Lesia and Valery, who tied the knot at the barricade today, making use of a new law that marriages can take place immediately. The guest of honor, Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko. May I kiss the bride, he asks. No one was going to refuse the former heavyweight champion boxer. A true shotgun wedding. Well, as you can see, there's not much good news here, so when we do get some, we cherish it. Well, earlier I spoke to the Ukrainian MP Roman Hirschuk, who spent the day driving into Irpin to help to bring people out. He spoke to us from his car, and I started by asking him what he'd witnessed all day.
I'm trying to help people to get to the railway station from the border of of Kyiv and Irpin region. Now, just a few minutes ago, I left one couple They know from Irpin. They live there for 10 days, and they told me that Russian kills civilian people which are trying to evacuate it. In the morning, one family with 5 persons, I drove them to railway station, and they told me that they saw when in 50 minutes near their family, it was killed one family by Russian. It's terrible because they shoot on civilian people. They don't understand why they do it. Maybe it's for scare. Maybe it's just because they're animals.
Are the men staying behind to fight? I mean, are there still Ukrainian soldiers trying to hold the town?
Yes, Ukrainian soldiers trying to hold the town of Irpin. It's for 2 days. It's a battle for Irpin, and we hope that our armed forces trying to take this city, and it's a humanitarian catastrophe for the people which are now there and can't evacuate it.
We heard President Zelenskyy give another address just a few minutes ago in which he was really full of rage about the West being, as he said, complicit by not doing enough to help Ukrainians on the ground militarily. Do you agree with him?
I agree with our president. Russian bombed civilian people, Russian bombed our buildings, Russian bombed schools and kindergartens. And it's a biggest problem because the city like Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Mariupol, they're under attack. And even I think the next it will be Kyiv. And only one asked for NATO country, close the sky over Ukraine.
If Kyiv were to fall, if the capital falls, is that the end of this war, do you think?
No, because it can be end of the world when even one Ukrainian fighting, and all our country will be fight. I think that it's impossible to take Kyiv because from every window of this city there are people who are going to fight and who are, can't live in occupation. And we have a lot of people with guns, people with which are want to protect this city, and we absolutely believe in our armed forces. And I think it's impossible that Kyiv will fall. Only one way is when if Putin want to bomb Kyiv for all his bombs which he has.
Roman Hirscher, thank you very much.
Thank you, Great Britain.
Now, President Zelenskyy warned earlier today that Russian forces are preparing to attack the Black Sea port of Odessa, whose mayor said that the city was ready to fight. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, is there. Lindsay.
Matt, and President Zelenskyy also said that an attack on Odessa would be a war crime. And I think he meant that not just because of the suffering that people here would have, but also a cultural crime, because this city is very dear to Russians as well. It was founded by Catherine the Great in the late 1700s. It was a very important city in the Russian Empire. It was a big port during the Soviet period. It's somewhere that Russians used to come on holiday. And so I think he was trying to reach out to Russians in that. In his speech today, he talked in both Ukrainian and Russian. It's also extremely interesting to see how nothing has actually changed. So he gave that warning, but nothing on the ground has moved at all. As far as I can tell, Russian forces are still exactly where they were when I was talking to you yesterday, about 130 or 140 kilometers to the east. But people here are preparing. Today I spent the morning with some citizens of Odessa who are learning to use weapons. They were on a private shooting range. I was talking to one of the guys who runs this shooting club. He said, we see what happened in Kyiv. They just gave out weapons willy-nilly to people, and the danger of that is twofold. First, that they might just be given to people who are thugs or criminals. But the second, what's the point of having a weapon to defend yourself if you don't know how to use it? And so these courses, short courses, 1 day, 2 days, have become very popular here and across Ukraine. And that's what we saw today with the people who are learning to fire weapons. Of course, they are the backstop. The Ukrainian army are the ones who are going to be in the front. But it also gives people this spirit that they are defending themselves and that they are defending their city. And I think that's particularly important in Odessa. The mayor here used to be seen as somewhat equivocal, maybe even pro-Russian. He had a Russian passport until 2017, but he's been very clear in the last few weeks that he is a Ukrainian and he is defending a Ukrainian city. He's been out there making that very, very clear. The governor here, well, President Zelenskyy replaced him last week because he was seen as possibly ambiguous as well, replaced him with a colonel who's been very senior in fighting the Russians since 2014 in the eastern area. So the sense is that Odessa is ready, Odessa is waiting, Odessa is waiting. As yet, nothing on the horizon.
Lindsay, thanks very much. Take care. Now, Boris Johnson has promised Volodymyr Zelenskyy that he will work with Britain's allies to provide more defensive equipment to Ukraine, along with wider sanctions against Russia, saying that international support and admiration for Ukraine is growing every day. Meanwhile, Labour has called for an investigation into claims that Mr. Johnson helped to get a peerage for Russian businessman Yevgeny Lebedev, despite accusations that there were concerns about security, claims which ministers have denied. Kieran Jenkins reports.
He is the rich Russian-born son of an ex-KGB agent. Did Boris Johnson intervene to elevate Evgeny Lebedev to Lord Lebedev of Hampton and Siberia, despite accusations of security concerns, as the Sunday Times and others report? It's not the story the Prime Minister wants to tell the night before he asks Parliament for emergency powers to sanction Russian oligarchs. After some cross-party criticism, it's been too little, too slow. Last week, the UK government said it would give companies, many with suspected ties to Russia, 18 months to declare who actually owns them. That will now be cut to 6 months. The government would also have the power to adopt sanctions already put in place, say in the EU, US, Australia or Canada, while it builds up a legal case of its own. Why? Because the UK has become an international hub for Russian money. Take London property alone. There's reportedly £1.5 billion linked to the Kremlin or Russians accused of corruption, with 830 million of that held in secretive offshore companies in the British overseas territories or crown dependencies. EU countries have been busy snaring oligarch super yachts. Among them, the 200-foot-long Lady M of Russia's richest man, Alexei Mordashov, which is now in Italian hands. And Amore Vero, true love, truly stuck in France, out of the reach of Igor Sechin, boss of Russian oil giant Rosneft. The Prime Minister has been talking up Britain's actions. Downing Street said he told Ukraine's President Zelenskyy this afternoon he'd work on providing further defensive equipment, and they discussed Russia's barbaric attacks and Boris Johnson's 6-point plan to pressure Russia. But Labour said the plans still give oligarchs 6 months to offload high-value assets and called for a parliamentary investigation into Lord Lebedev's peerage. Number 10 said all peerages are in recognition of their contribution to society and vetted by the House of Lords Appointments Commission.
The sanctions and other measures have to be the strongest that are possible across the world, including here in the United Kingdom. It's among the reasons we're pushing the government so hard on sanctions, because the sanctions have to do a lot of work here. They have to not just isolate Russia, they have to make it impossible for Russia to function.
Vladimir Putin briefly gave up extreme social distancing yesterday to take tea with Russian flight attendants, where he called economic sanctions on Russia akin to a declaration of war. Putin, who started this war, one man wrecking millions of lives. So what welcome awaits them here? The Home Secretary met Ukrainians in London today as her French counterpart was accusing Britain of a lack of humanity, claiming 150 refugees from Ukraine were stranded without visas in Calais, trying to reach the UK.
Let me just correct what has been said by the French government. The British government is not turning anybody around or turning anybody aback at all. And I think it's really important to emphasise that, particularly this time when all nations across Europe must work together to help and support people in need and fleeing. Ukraine at this awful, awful time.
More than 1.5 million have fled the fighting. But how many of these people have relatives in the UK? For now, only those joining family can come to Britain, and over 10,000 have applied, with a broader scheme being worked on. So from this extraordinary refugee exodus, the number granted UK visas so far is 50.
Well, earlier I spoke to Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. I started by asking him to respond to Vladimir Putin's comments that British sanctions were sanctions hysteria and akin to a declaration of war.
Well, they're clearly not. They're lawful, they're proportionate, they're warranted. What I think it shows is the impact those sanctions have had with our international partners. And we've been at the vanguard of pushing this, and you've seen the Russian ruble plummet, you've seen the Russian stock market plummet, you've seen the Russian central bank, which has been subject to measures, have to double interest rates. And as Putin has stumbled and stuttered in the first phase, and it is only the first phase of this war in Ukraine, he has come out with more rhetoric and come out, and we can expect him to come out with even more heavy-handed tactics. And whilst that will have an appalling humanitarian impact, and we need to deal with that as well, which is why we're providing £220 million of humanitarian assistance, it does show that that Putin's invasion is not going according to plan. And he knows it, and the commanders around him know it, and the Russian people are seeing it as well.
But if these sanctions were designed to change his mind, to stop him from any aggressive action, they've come far too late, haven't they?
Well, no, and I don't think that's true. It has been an unprecedented response. It's had the impact that I've just described on the currency, on the central bank, on interest rates, on the stock market. But no one thought this was going to be
but it's not stopping the military action. They're still pummeling the cities here.
Yes, although they haven't actually occupied yet a major city. And so he's feeling that pinch. But look, this isn't going to get resolved overnight. We need to have strategic stamina. This is going to take months at least to resolve. It is not going to be over quickly.
I know you don't accept donations from foreigners, but there are British citizens of Russian descent who have been linked to Vladimir Putin, and they have given money to the Tory party in recent years. I just wonder how many millions have they given to your party?
So first of all, our beef, our grievance is with Putin. We have, if you talk about Russians that are here either running businesses or indeed contributing to political donations, they often are people fleeing Putin, some of his greatest critics. I don't think we should get into jingoism of saying anyone with a Russian-sounding name or with Russian descent is somehow in hoc to Putin.
But we're not doing that.
It's often the reverse.
But has there been enough scrutiny about the money that has come into your party coffers from these sources originally linked to Russia? I wonder if you've exercised enough scrutiny there. You really know where that money is coming from.
Yeah, there's all been declared. All of the donations with any that we receive from anyone are declared. So there's been absolutely full transparency. I think we should avoid going down the xenophobic or anti-foreigner thing of saying that anyone who's got a foreign-sounding name shouldn't give to a political party if they're naturalised as a citizen or it's otherwise permissible. I think that's just wrong. And I make this broader point. I've got in my constituency decent law-abiding Russians. Their children go to our schools. I think we just need to be very careful about our language in all of this.
This is about incredibly wealthy individuals, oligarchs, who made their money in Russia only because Vladimir Putin allowed them to do so. And I know some of them have gone into exile and are running away from him, and some of them have even been killed by him, but a lot of them are living in London very happily, with his permission, so to speak. So how are you going to cut your links with those particular people? Roman Abramovich being one of them.
Well, in relation to Abramovich, he's already in the process of selling Chelsea. I don't think you're suggesting that there have been donations to the Conservative Party from him. That would, and I'm sure you're not. But look, I come back to my point. No. We have sanctioned over 200 people since 2015. We have brought forward this groundbreaking set of sanctions. We're introducing on Monday the Economic Crimes Bill, which will strengthen and expedite the unexplained wealth orders and the process for finding out the transparency around corporate chains and who actually owns the company. And I don't think any country has gone further, and will continue to do so.
And I gather you're going to bring that period of scrutiny from 18 months
down to 6 months in this new bill. I wonder why you didn't do that at the beginning.
Look, we're constantly looking at how we can go further and faster. And at the same time, the UK is an open, outward-looking economy. It's part of our strength. We're not putting the shutters up, but we are making sure, and that measure is part of it, that people with dirty money can't launder it through the UK, cannot use other corporate vehicles to gain a veneer of respectability in this country. And we will continue to look at where we've got measures in place. Can we strengthen them further? That's the right thing to do.
There's a piece in the Sunday Times today saying that the intelligence community decided some time ago it would be a bad idea for Yevgeny Lebedev to get a peerage, and according to this report the Prime Minister intervened and basically allowed him to get one anyway. What's your response to that report?
Well, first of all, we don't comment on intelligence matters, but what I can tell you is that, first of all, we have a very strict and rigorous process for peerages, and that it was applied rigorously and stringently in this case.
President Zelenskyy in Kyiv was scathing in his overnight address to his people about the fact that a no-fly zone will not be introduced by NATO, and said the only thing we've received from NATO so far through the procurement system are 50 tons of diesel. Isn't that the problem, that on one hand, we are giving them all this rhetorical support and of course support in weapons as well, but we're not really making the military difference that allows the Ukrainian people to survive the barrage of Russian artillery?
Look, I understand the plight that he faces. We have provided over 2,000 anti-tank missiles. We've trained 200,000 Ukrainian forces under Operation Orbital. We'll look at what further we can do. Just in relation to no-fly zones, I think we've been clear now, so of our allies, we're not going to engage directly in military confrontation with Russia. That's not something that follows from this conflict for us. Ukraine's not a NATO member. We want to support it in every other way we can. And of course, if we did do that, it would serve precisely Putin's narrative that he's in confrontation with the West. We shouldn't give succor to that. He is engaged in an illegal invasion against a neighbour, and we want to protect their democratic and territorial integrity. And the measures we're taking, supporting the Ukrainian forces, the sanctions on Putin and those around him and those financing his war machine, we'll continue to do it. We'll continue to ramp it up. We'll continue to work with our international partners and indeed call for others, China, India and others around the world, to do so as well. They are leading members of the international community. They should step up to the plate too.
What the Ukrainians are saying is that if you don't stop him now with more robust military measures, even though they're not members of NATO, he will go further and we will regret this in the future.
Look, I think there's a very real risk that we'll see a prolonged crisis. I think the challenge for Putin will be, after his stuttering start to the campaign, is does he get bogged down? I think the Ukrainians have shown their resolve and their steeliness, and this could end up looking very much like a Chechnya Mark II style quagmire for Putin, and we want to do everything we can to avoid that, but the answer is for Putin to end his illegal invasion and take his troops out of Ukraine.
Have you discussed the nuclear threat that he's posing, the threats that he's made, in cabinet?
Look, I think a lot of that is rhetoric coming from Putin. He's trying to change the conversation because the conventional plan he had, the plan A, is failing. And obviously I don't discuss what we comment on and discuss in cabinet.
Dominic Raab, thanks very much.
Good to talk to you.
Now, this has already become Europe's biggest, fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War, according to the UN, which says that a staggering 1.5 million people have now fled Ukraine in just 11 days. Our correspondent Porrick O'Brien is in the border town of Uzhgorod, where he's been talking again to a 12-year-old girl who fled her home in Kyiv. She's desperate to come to Britain, but can't under current government rules.
At the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in the border town of Uzhgorod, western Ukraine, the congregation has temporarily swollen, with thousands of refugees leaving the country through this exit point. When or if evacuation routes are established out of places like Mariupol in the south, it could get very busy indeed at Sunday Mass. Vladimir the Great introduced Christianity to the Slavs. The caption reads, "He baptized you." The caption over Zelenskyy, a message to the Russian army, "He will bury you." The nearest fighting is hundreds of miles from here, but this is still an entire country at war. So it's not long before a group of 6 armed plainclothes police appear. Greek Catholic chanting meets Ukrainian police questioning. According to the UN's refugee agency, this is now the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II. Poland has taken about half of those leaving so far. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has been touring refugee centres over the weekend, including this Polish one, where Natalie Zolotarova from eastern Ukraine is now staying.
Ми приїхали до Польщі, як вони нам допомагають, і всі інші країни, це просто зворушує, правда. Ну. І тоді, кажеться, тоді не так страшно, і тоді я думаю, що ми переможемо все-таки з такими друзями.
Since the war started, over 1.5 million Ukrainians have become refugees in Europe. Poland has taken by far the most, over 880,000, while nearly 170,000 have crossed into Hungary. Slovakia and Moldova, meanwhile, have taken about 100,000 each, while Romania's taken just over 70,000. Moldova is one of the poorest countries in Europe. It's taken more refugees per capita than anywhere else. Yesterday we introduced you to 12-year-old Yeva from Kyiv and her diary. She's staying at a refugee centre here in Uzhhorod. This morning, herself and her grandmother went out to explore the city that's hosting them. And the latest instalment from her journal. Overnight, she'd spoken to friends still in Kharkiv.
В Харькове все очень плохо. Наших друзей и знакомых выгнали из подвалов. Их посадили в грузовики и куда-то везут. Возможно, в центр. Никто не знает. У бабушкиной подруги снесли полдома. Все друзья хотят выехать за Харьков.
Yeva wants to come to Britain. Every page of her diary, London. At the moment, the British government resettlement scheme only applies to Ukrainians with a family connection or sponsorship in Britain.
Probably they can help for us because the war and we have hard situation. Probably they can help for us.
Well, no, at the moment you have to have family in Britain.
No, I haven't. I haven't family, I haven't friends. Just friends.
So at the moment you cannot go to Britain?
No, because I haven't.
Do you think that's right, or do you think the British government should let everybody in?
I think they can take our Ukrainians because we have hard situation to the end probably help for us.
Off the back of yesterday's report, dozens of people in Britain have contacted us with concrete offers of accommodation for Yeva and Irina. A number of serious literary agents have also reached out. Yeva and Irina, though, are now exploring the possibility of travelling to an EU country instead. Top of their list at the moment, Ireland.
Well, earlier I spoke to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, who's at the refugee transit camp on the Polish border. And I began by asking for his thoughts on the vast number of refugees leaving Ukraine.
Today we've gone over the awful mark of 1.5 million refugees from Ukraine into the 5 main refugee hosting countries, neighboring countries. I'm here in Poland. I'm in a transit center for refugees just a few meters away, literally, from the Ukrainian border. And I've been observing since this morning people streaming in. So I have no doubt that this figure will go out even more in the next few days, unfortunately.
I mean, 1.5 million people in 11 days of war, that's more people than the Syrian conflict pushed into Europe in several years of war, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. The Syrian conflict pushed 6 million Syrians into Syria's neighboring countries. But again, by comparison, it was not over a period of a few days. It was more drawn out. What strikes in this crisis is the sheer mass and speed of the outflow. And And we may have just seen the beginning, unfortunately, because the news that we have from inside Ukraine, where we still have teams trying to help, is that hundreds of thousands, if not millions, are on the move. And others, as you know, are trapped in cities that are besieged or bombed, and they cannot get out. But if they can, they'll be also joining the crowd moving.
Talking about countries that aren't neighbouring this crisis, in Britain, we are allowing family members to come in. So if you already have someone who's living in Britain who's Ukrainian, you can join them as a family member. But there is no plan at the moment for a wholesale welcoming of refugees. Do you think that should change?
Well, let's see how this moves. For the time being, it's actually better that people go and stay with families and communities. It is easier. But we may soon reach the point where this is not possible. We may soon reach the point where the people coming do not have anymore those contacts, like this first wave of refugees. And then that repartition will become necessary. By the way, may I make an appeal here? Now we're all focusing on the Ukrainian refugee crisis, and rightly so. But let's not forget that there's many others that need that hospitality. Up to a few weeks ago, we spoke so much about the Afghans. We should not forget the Afghans now, and other refugees as well. So it's an increasing burden, but so is the world. It's a difficult world full of conflict. We need to have that solidarity.
But to be clear, Filippo Grandi, should Britain be one of those countries in Europe, not neighbouring the crisis, that should open its doors to refugees, whether they have family in Britain or not, if the need arises?
I really hope so, yes.
If you could speak directly to Vladimir Putin, what would you say to him?
I would repeat what the Secretary General of the United Nations said a few days ago. For the sake of humanity, stop this war.
Filippo Grandi, thank you very much.
Thank you.